I Will Make You Proud by Wheredoesshego, read by Hummingbird Audio. This fic includes talk of abuse, talk of suicide, and potential sexual content. Read with care. Chapter 3, Who He Had Become. Hermione, May 2006. The pub was crawling with auras by lunchtime. The bar had been emptied, the room swept thoroughly, and Garrus Flint had been taken in for questioning. He would be required to give a memory that could be stored and then pored over by the best investigative auras they had, looking for clues as to how Draco Malfoy, undesirable number 1, had managed to walk into a pub in the middle of a wizarding village, rent a room, and kill himself in it without anyone noticing. Every aura in Britain had been on high alert for Malfoy for several years, and he wasn't exactly unremarkable. Someone who could easily pass under the radar. He was excessively tall, at least 6'3", athletic and broad, to say nothing for the shock of blonde hair that immediately marked him as Malfoy. He could not move around unnoticed. There was a discussion as to whether he'd polyjuiced himself. Hermione thought that this was quite plausible. However, it begged the question as to where he would get the ingredients from whilst on the run. After realizing that it was him, Hermione stumbled from the room, gasping for air, sat dry heaving on the staircase. Garrus had appeared in the entryway to the door below, dirty rag in hand, along with the glass he'd been supposedly cleaning. "You all right?" he asked, clearly alarmed by her gray complexion. Hermione had felt like she could faint. It was one thing to see dead bodies. She did it all the time. It was another to see someone you had known since you were 11, their face frozen into a mask of anguished despair, bloodless lips pulled over white teeth, eyes bulging, the whites filled with blood. The rope burns on his slender neck had made her want to weep. It had been such a confronting death, not a peaceful one. She wondered if he had changed his mind after he had pushed the chair away, if he had fought, kicked his legs, tried to reach out to the chair to find purchase. But she had noticed that his nails hadn't been neatly clipped. Smooth, straight lines. There was no evidence that he tried to get his fingers under the rope. She wondered if he had been scared. Hermione couldn't imagine Draco Malfoy being scared of anything. Quite the opposite, in fact. His name was now one that inspired fear, much in the way Voldemort's had. Except Malfoy wasn't weak, clinging to power and life through dwindling Horcruxes the way Voldemort had been at the end. Voldemort had not stood a chance when Malfoy had to overthrow him spectacularly at the end of the war, effortlessly killing anyone who had stood in his way. Voldemort was dead, and within weeks the Death Eaters had been disbanded or hidden underground. Malfoy wasn't weak. He was young, strong, an exceptionally powerful dark wizard, much more so than anyone had realized. Currently, his motives for his actions since the war were largely unknown. Other than killing seamlessly, indiscriminately, he had an agenda that the auras could not decipher. He didn't seem interested in carrying on where Voldemort had left off. He never stayed in one place but left a trail of destruction wherever he went. He was impossible to track down. He maimed and injured at will, seemingly hell-bent on something, but no one knew what. He had supporters. Many people viewed him as a hero of some sort for getting rid of Voldemort and effectively bringing about the end of the war. But Hermione guaranteed none of them would want to be in a locked room with him. Stories of his brutality were reported to Harry's Aura's office constantly. Harry, who was currently acting as head Aura while Robarts recovered from a bout of ill health, was tortured by the stories of Malfoy. He blamed himself for thinking that there had been something redeemable in him. They spoke about it often, Hermione reassuring Harry that nobody could have known the depths that Malfoy would sink to, or that he was capable of levels of dark magic he seemingly produced without thought or consequence. The Malfoy of their school days had been petty, spiteful. He had changed beyond recognition after his failed attempt to murder Albus Dumbledore and his indoctrination as a Death Eater. No one could have predicted that the snotty, pampered prince of their time at Hogwarts would become a deadly killer. His brutal murder of his own father at the age of 21 seemed the catalyst for his life heading in this doomed direction. Garrus had swayed on his feet when he had eventually descended the stairs and informed him in a shaking voice that the body in the rafters was Draco Malfoy. His eyes had grown wide as the implication hit him. "Draco shot Malfoy in my pub," he had muttered on repeat. "For all the people to bloody die in my pub, it had to be him." Once Hermione had gathered herself enough, she had called the office to let them know what had happened, and then attempted to question Garrus himself. "I'm sure I would have noticed if it was Malfoy. I swear I didn't know," he insisted, his dirty hands out in front of him. "Last thing I bloody need is the likes of him in here." Garrus looked suitably horrified, and Hermione was inclined to believe him. His memories would be examined in the pensive, and he would also be subject to full investigation under Wheredoesshego, to be sure. It wasn't long before she heard a succession of loud pops, and her colleagues descended on the scene in their droves. Harry stood into the pub looking extremely harried, closely followed by Robarts, who had been called back on duty on this occasion. She stood in the bar area and filled them in on what she knew, taking in Harry's own pale face, the shock there evident. She used her wand to transfer her notes to Robarts' notepad, then stood clenching and unclenching her fist and anxiously waiting for her own partner to make an appearance. A faint pop behind her a minute or two later told her that Blaise had arrived. She could see that he already knew. If Harry had been pale, then Blaise was positively chalky. His usual beautiful complexion, a sallow shade, his brown eyes, normally so full of laughter, were wide, glassy, and unblinking. Hermione put a hand on his arm. "Are you okay? You don't need to be here. You know that. Harry knows the situation." Blaise shook his head. "I have already told him I want to be here," he replied through his shaking hands, betraying his words. "Blaise, I know he was your friend," Hermione began. Blaise let out a bitter-sounding laugh. "It wasn't until he decided to make himself Britain's most wanted man," he replied, shaking his head slightly. "I can't believe I'll never be able to ask him why now. I so desperately wanted to catch him, to talk to him. I can't actually believe he's dead." Blaise looked utterly exhausted. Hermione knew this would be a hard day for him. She put a hand on his arm and gave him a gentle squeeze. Katie Bell came stomping down the rickety stairs. "They're cutting him down now," she said, her voice low and reverent. She was aware of how distressing this might be for Blaise. She used her wand to levitate a leather bag and the books out in front of her, avoiding tampering with any fingerprints. I'll get these back to the office for you, Hermione. Thank you. Leave them at my desk, please, Katie, Hermione replied, her eyes and mine already at the top of the stairs. Katie apparated away, and Hermione looked at Blaise. Are you ready? She asked. She took a deep breath and started up the stairs. His reluctance was palpable. The dark magic still infused the room, as it had when Hermione had entered a few hours earlier. They had found nothing more of interest rather than his bag and the books which Hermione was desperate to get a look at. The medical personnel were here now. They were bringing Draco down from the rafters. Hermione watched as they cut the rope and his body fell, caught by the waiting hands below that gripped his legs, ready to take his weight. Be careful, Blaise shouted with a splutter. He rushed forward as they lowered him to the floor, putting a gloved hand out to cradle his head as they laid him down. Hermione felt her heart break a little as she watched Blaise take in the sight of his old friend, the evidence of his violent death clear, inescapable. He shouldn't be here, she thought. Blaise had clapped a hand over his mouth and was now trying to stifle tears as his eyes roved over Draco's face. Hermione went to his side, not looking down. She couldn't see Malfoy's face again. Blaise, she began, but he held up a hand. Come back, she said, trying to soothe him away from the awful sight. But he remained stock still. He seemed to be angry now, his sadness replaced by rage. What the fuck happened? He almost shouted, hitting his palm on the floor. How the fuck did we end up like this? He was a killer, Blaise, Hermione replied. Maybe he couldn't live with himself. Blaise was thoughtful. Hermione could see his throat working as he swallowed down his grief. A lot of people will think this is good news, you know, she said to him. His reputation. Fuck his reputation, Blaise exclaimed. None of you knew him. Something happened to make him this way. He wasn't always like this. Someone could have stopped him. Stop this. He let Hermione guide him away from the body now, as the medical staff stepped in to put Draco into a body bag for transfer. Blaise wiped away one tear and sniffed. Then he stood up straight, his sorrow pushed aside. Right, he said, hands on hips. I'm going to sweep the room again. Hermione left him up there, heading downstairs and giving him a moment to recover himself. She was surprised by Blaise's tears for Malfoy. She hadn't thought they'd been friends for years. Blaise had defected early in the war and come to fight for the Order. He was a good friend to Harry and Ron, and had been in a relationship with Ginny for some time now. She thought back to what he'd said about Malfoy changing. She wondered what he had been like with his friends at Hogwarts. It would be interesting to find out the other side of Draco Malfoy while he had been at school. The day was long and draining, emotionally and mentally. There was so much to unpack. Later, Hermione had stood with some of the others who had gone to Hogwarts, and she had a lump in her throat as they had brought the body bag past. The finality of it jarring her. A whole life reduced to a plastic bag, zipped up over his face, to be taken to a cold, lonely morgue. She wondered if he would have a funeral. Who was there to mourn him? Hermione was relieved when at 6 p.m. Harry told her to return to the office, to turn in her notes and then head home. She apparated back, her mind ablaze with questions she had about the Malfoy case, and was greeted by Katie, her cheeks flushed and seemingly full of energy despite the lateness of the day. Guess what? Katie asked her as she reached her desk. What? She asked faintly, her enthusiasm almost at zero. The bag and books from the scene, Katie said, and Hermione nodded. Well, they've been processed, fast-tracked for evidence to make sure we've got everything, and they've already told me. Hermione waited impatiently for Katie to get to the point. So, it turns out that all that was in the bag was files. She had a grin on her face as she delivered the news. The bag was bloody chock full of Malfoy's own memories. Memories? Hermione looked up sharply from her quill and pad. Yep, loads of them. And the books look like they are diaries too. He's practically done your job for you, Katie exclaimed, clearly excited. Hermione was confused. Just a bag of memory files? Where was his overnight stuff, all of his other belongings? No idea, Katie replied. But they said they can all be released into evidence now they've been checked. It should be on your desk by tomorrow lunchtime at the latest. Hermione nodded. A bag of Draco Malfoy's memories. Her eyes widened. These could have answers to so many questions she had. She was desperate to start looking into the case, but she knew she needed to get home to eat and rest before she fainted. As she lay down that night, her mind was haunted by Draco Malfoy's cold, dead face. She thought she'd not close her eyes without seeing it for a long time. She couldn't wait for the next day, for the chance to search his memories and maybe, finally, get some insight to the enigma that had been Draco Malfoy.